You are listening to The Edge, a podcast for personal development junkies and visionaries living right at the precipice of oh shit meets fuck yeah. I'm Nadia, an embodiment and relationship coach and a lover of all edges. Stick around to listen to raw, unpolished conversations where we explore our personal and collective edges in all their erotic glory. Today, you are listening to a coaching episode. In these episodes, you get a little peek into what is normally a private space, my one-on-one coaching practice. This really gives you a glimpse into what it's like to be guided and held by me, and will hopefully leave you with some key aha moments. Everyone who is coached here in these episodes has consented to publicizing these sessions and remains anonymous for the sake of confidentiality.
I mean, the continuous thing that comes up for me is the communication between us is usually extremely good. We're able to be open-minded to one another and respect each other's, you know, presence within moments. And for me, sometimes it just feels like when you're talking about, the what we do have between one another, and like in my mind when we were sitting there, I was thinking of this very luscious, like this field that's just lush with grass and corn for some reason is what came to mind. Just these tall stalks of corn that they kind of blend together. And it just seems like sometimes there's a separation, like a fence gets put in place. Those fields become two. And it tends to happen within conflict, but it's mainly when there's some form of disagreement. So it feels like there is a form of criticism that's taken extremely personally. So that respect for one another, kind of that fence gets put in place, and it becomes two sides instead of something that's conjoined within the conflict or conversation that's happening at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah. Beautiful. So there's this, you feel the field of the we, and it's really cool visuals with that. And what I'm hearing is that there's these moments, specifically when criticism shows up, where it suddenly feels like instead of the we field, it's now two separate fields. Am I understanding
Correct.
that right? Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just as a follow up to that, to clarify, is that in your experience, right? Is that criticism in one direction, or does that go both ways?
It definitely can go both ways. Um, but it feels like that's kind of a trigger specifically. Um, so if there is something that's even perceived as criticism,
Mhm.
it seems like there's a big reaction to it.
Mhm.
So it kind of transforms into something else instead of it being a conversation where we have love and respect for one another. It becomes kind of adversarial.
Yeah. I'm going to speak to that in a moment, because this is a very universal phenomena that comes up in any relating, right? It's not even specifically romantic. There's a
Mm.
moment where there's a fracture and a shift from this person is my ally to this person, and it's not conscious, right? But to this person is someone I have to fight for my own survival against. And it's like we never, of course, are thinking about it cognitively to that degree, because we're like, of
Mhm.
course, no, this is my partner, this is the person I love, da, da, da. And there is in our survival mechanism a place where we go, now I have to, instead of us fighting as a team against something else or the world, or like we're coming together and facing challenges together, I have to fight the other person in order to get what I need. So the moment that we feel that our own needs are in jeopardy, the other person can sort of become like an adversary for a moment. That makes sense. Mm.
Yeah. Um, I think the static that comes up for me in that came up in that moment and that's come up recently is not that when I'm communicating sometimes I'm like struggling to feel understood. Mm, yeah, to feel like totally heard and seen in the experience that I'm having or whatever I'm trying to get across. And it's that it's like just that. And then because I feel that way, I like really over exaggerate um points that I feel like I need to make or that I want to feel heard. And
Mhm.
yeah, I'll make it like really big when it's
Mm,
really it could just be this one sentence. But because I'm feel like I'm not going to be understood, I have to make it a whole paragraph, and then it ends up like then it can be taken um I don't wanna say hurtful because I don't well, I mean, sometimes it is perceived as mean
mm,
from him,
mhm.
and that's yeah, it's like a that I have to be big, I have to be loud, and not necessarily that I am always loud, but just in the communication that it needs to be more exaggerated.
Mhm. Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what I'm hearing there is that there is a deep desire to be understood, that there's possibly a wound. It's been around for a while that pops up here in this dynamic around not being understood. And so, your protection mechanism, the way that you come at it to take care of yourself, is to get really assertive, is to go into, like you had said in your form before we got on this call, like that there's this like, "Ugh, I get lost in the wanting to be right." And I'm really hearing that it's like getting lost in the wanting to be understood,
Mhm,
which can present as the same thing on the outside, but the desire is a little bit different,
mhm,
because it's really when we want to be understood, we want to be seen, and so we feel unseen, and so we may over compensate in some way, right, to be seen, like, no, no, really, like, please, like, see me. And in the process of doing that, of the overcompensation that comes from you trying to get your needs met, it's creating challenge for your partner. And so now he's having an experience, and I would love to pass the baton on to him. Like, what is the experience when you are receiving the paragraph that says, no, 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 like you don't understand?
Um, I guess the issue that I have with it that keeps coming up for me is it feels very personal. It'll be a moment where maybe there's like some form of uh criticism that feels like mothering to me. That's something that's come up. Um, like an example would be uh, the amount of food that I'm eating, like a dietary choice. And then when I bring up a boundary or a criticism of the comment on that, then it feels like it becomes more personal. Um, so it feels like it goes from being a conversation to that adversarial uh, kind of situation where it feels like it's a personal attack more than it is trying to for her trying to be seen in that moment. It kind of transfers into something else,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it becomes. I mean, assertive would be one thing, but it feels more aggressive than assertive.
Got it. Right. So your experience is it goes a few steps beyond, I want to be understood or heard or seen. And it turns into, now there's aggression at me, there's criticism at me. And it feels like a mothering, sort of complaining, criticizing energy. about what you're doing.
Yeah, like, I guess trying to set a boundary on something, um, where I feel like my own autonomy or the way that I'm taking care of myself in that moment is kind of a decision that's mine. So within that moment, feeling like I'm being mothered, um, doesn't feel good to me. That doesn't feel like a positive form of criticism. Um, so when I set a boundary, it seems like that boundary is taken personally, as if, yeah, she feels like she's not being seen, and then it just gets more aggressive instead of recognition of the boundary.
Mm. And what's your experience, Em, as all of that's happening when he's holding the boundary, when he's having, yeah, I'm just curious about your experiences at that point. And it sounds like there's I love to be really specific. So it sounds like there was a recent scenario that did involve, like you were referring to, some sort of dietary choices or something like that. And so perhaps we can, if you're comfortable with it, go into that particular scenario, because I do find the less we stay in the conceptual and the theoretical, and the more we get into the details, the more we can actually get to like the granular pieces. So do you want to,
Yeah.
as you're going through the experience, maybe walk me through the context if you guys are both open to it?
Yeah, I feel like for me, when he's talking about that, the kind of the experience that I was talking about having, uh, it feels related to this scenario that we'll bring up or whatever. But like later on in it, I was talking about the bear thing. Anyways,
Mhm.
let's see. Okay, so if there's, how do I approach this? I guess just in direct response to that of your first question, that if that's the first thing's happening and then he's returning returning it, then that like is the point where I feel like I'm not feeling seen or understood, because it feels like that moment is the thing that, like, the wall is going up right there for me. If I'm expressing something, I just want it to be just like taken in, but it seems like it's always fought with, or there's always a response to it in some way that then makes me feel like I need to be like louder and bigger next time,
Mm, got it.
so that because I'm always wanting the response to be like, I hear you,
Mhm,
I'll think about that or whatever,
mhm.
not defensiveness, which I'm sure, like, I feel like he has a very similar experience. I'm talking for you right now, but we've talked about this of me, right? Of when he comes to me with something, that I do the same thing. I don't just respond, um, like, I hear you. I'm also fighting. So, damn, I feel like the conflict's really convoluted. I'm like totally open to telling that story. It just has a lot of different like like chapters.
I think we should dive in if you guys are comfortable. I mean, this is what we're here for. And I think just using, because what we can do then is when we walk through how it played out, we can actually workshop how to shift that. But I need
Okay.
specifics to be
Yes.
able to like have us go through that experience again in a different way.
Okay. So I uh I notice how much he eats. Like, it's almost unconsciously for me. I have a history of like eating disorders and paying too much attention to that in general. So it's like just something I'm constantly hyper aware of. I don't want to, I want to tell the story without like bringing up the argument in a really big way, because I don't, um, whatever. I have my judgment about it, that he's a very large man. He's 6'6", and my own judgment is like not eating enough food, right? Which maybe I don't need to bring it up, but I feel like this, I get to have an opinion about this because we're married and your health is my, like, I get to be concerned about that. This whole thing, whatever. And instead of coming to him in like a respectful and open way to have a conversation about that, because I already feel a lot of anxiety about it, just about bringing anything up. It's only when it's like really intense for me that I'll just like make a remark about it. Like the one that happened the other day, I had made dinner, and I didn't think that he had eaten it, and he said he was going to make popcorn, and I like I like peep out like, aren't you going to eat your protein first? And he he just said, don't mom me. And the way that I took that in that moment was very like, don't mom me. Like, I don't know if I'm like changing my tone of voice enough. And I'm not, because we've had this talk, I'm not saying that's the way that he said it. And I know that for real. That's the way that I took it in, probably because of like the nervousness and already that I was having at that moment. And I totally shut down at that, at him saying that.
Right.
Um, and this is so the thing that happens next is something that happens kind of consistently, which is that if I feel triggered by something, I don't say anything about it because I don't feel like I fully understand it. I don't understand why, I want to like think about it. Why am I so upset by that? I know that I'm upset right now, but I feel like if I open my mouth in this moment, it's going to only be not productive shit that I'm going to say.
Mhm. Got it.
So I shut down about it, and I'm like super prone to stonewalling, you know. Um, this is at nighttime when this happens, so 15 minutes go by or whatever, gets in bed. He like lays a hand on me. I'm laying there with my eyes closed. I kind of just ignore what's going on, and at some point, I said I'm going to put my earplugs in. I'm going to go to sleep,
Mm.
and
Got it.
um, the next morning, I still was in a really big mood about it. Didn't want to say anything about it. My perception of the situation is we're in the apartment together. I'm doing my best to like totally ignore everything. Even though seems really irritating to me when I'm in a mood like that. I'm like, I'm doing my thing. I'm going to have time to think about this later and sort it out like when I'm by myself and I have space. And I feel like I'm in my own little thing. And
Mhm.
like you can speak to this if you want to. For him, like what he tells me is that in those moments, I'm really big. My mood is like
Mm.
everywhere. Like my
Mhm.
black cloud is taking up the whole apartment, you
Mm.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah. And then
Well,
it explodes at some point.
of course. Of course. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So, what I'm hearing is there's two pieces. One is that there is a fear that you have about his health, whether warranted or not, but in your experience, there is a fear. And therefore, there's a desire to manage something around the
Yes.
diet. And then there's also this piece where you have the tendency to stonewall and to close, but that it comes from a desire to like just sit and process like what's going on, and until I understand exactly why I'm mad, I'm just sort of gonna do this. Does that feel true?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's check in with Pete.
Mhm.
Let's hear your experience of that evening from popcorn time through to the next day.
Yeah, I mean it is frustrating because it does seem like the stonewalling thing is consistent. I mean I'm 6'6" and almost 220 pounds. I'm not a string bean. I feel like I take fairly good care of myself, and we have a pretty specific diet that I adhere to. So I just don't feel like that's an issue. And we had set up a boundary beforehand around that. We had had a conversation where she had made kind of a like cutting comment, and all I asked, I just said, if you want to talk about things like that, bring it up in a conversational way. Don't make just like an offhanded comment in a moment. If you're like sincerely worried about that, let's have a conversation instead of just kind of slipping it in that way. Um,
Got it.
and I mean, I hear you. your perception of how you may have thought I said that. But in that moment, I didn't have any big emotion behind it. I just thought I was establishing a boundary again. And I was actually confused as to why the stonewalling was happening
Mhm.
because I didn't that moment there was no recognition of like on my part some kind of intense emotional response to that. It felt easy for me. Like it was just a reminder of the boundary that we had set beforehand.
Right.
And what you didn't mention is,
Oh,
I mean, there were 3 or 4 times I reached out
oh.
before she decided to go to bed. You know, I asked, I was like, "Hey, are you doing all right?" Because I felt like it was just kind of quiet and maybe there was some unsettled feeling there.
Mhm.
Um, and she and I said that multiple times, and I even apologized because I wasn't when I finally kind of realized there was something going on. I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm tired today. If I, coming off in any certain way." I forgot how I worded it, but and then right before we went to bed, I reached out and grabbed her leg and looked directly at her, and that's when she just turned and looked me directly in the eye and went, "I'm putting my earplugs in. Good night." I'm like, okay, so there is something going on, and I had to sit and kind of repeat what had happened, and I came to the conclusion, 2 or 3 minutes later that that's probably what the issue was, but yeah, I just wish there was more of a conversation within that moment. I mean, I could have responded differently as well. I recognize that. Maybe that's part of the process of, you know, those issues are always going to come up and it's how to confront them in a different way so she does feel
Exactly.
seen and you know.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah.
was my perception of the situation.
Mhm. Okay, so then I would love to hear from each of you as well. What would you have loved in that scenario instead? So if you could, wave a magic wand and have your partner do it exactly the way that feels best, what would that look like for you?
Mhm. I don't even feel like it's something that I'm allowed to ask for because I feel like it's me wanting, like, magical thinking, you know?
But this is the time. That doesn't
Right.
mean you're not demanding it, and I'm not demanding it of anyone in this space. We're just
Yeah,
getting to understand each other by
yeah,
putting out what, like, just putting into the space like what I actually sort of secretly want, even if I think it's absolutely impossible to ever get it.
yeah. Mine would have been that oh, well, are we starting from the moment when the feeling happened? Because I can't go
Yes.
backwards, I can't read it. That like, would have been sensitive to my shutdown in the moment and
Mhm.
would have, if he had said that, like, the "Don't mom me," that he would have, like, heard it how I heard it,
Mhm.
had seen me shut down about it, and would have, like, come over to me and been like, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it that way." Um, you know,
Yeah,
"I love you. I just wanna eat popcorn. Can we talk about this later?" Or something.
got it.
Yeah.
I'm curious, would you have rather that he not say the phrase itself, "Don't mom me," or is that fine? It's just the after. Like, you just want him to recognize that the closure that happened as a result of that was
That feels more important to me. Yeah,
recognizing the closure and then coming and shifting it.
yeah.
Okay. What about you?
I mean, considering we had had discussions about that before, I mean, I would like to think that there's enough faith that I can take care of myself in moments like that. Um, so once we set up a boundary like that, I mean, I just like it to be respected. Um, and as far as if they're moving past that, though, if there is a feeling, I mean, I felt like there were multiple situations where I did reach out and maybe it wasn't big enough. That's what I'm kind of hearing from you is it wasn't big enough in that moment. that you can recognize that an effort is being made and then ease into that and try and find me in the middle somewhere
Mhm.
when that's happening.
Mm. Mhm. Beautiful. Beautiful work so far. Okay. So we've heard what our experiences, what we would have loved instead, and what I'm going to sort of bring in what I'm seeing into this. My sense is okay, so like every other couple in the world, there's going to be a place where each of your individual wounds like gets rubbed up, and you each go into your own version of a protection mechanism, which are completely valid. But that protection mechanism creates another layer of conflict and distance and misunderstanding, and then it sort of snowballs, right? It's like the more we close, the harder it is to actually open. And so, what I'm feeling that we could bring into the space more is a little bit more expression of emotion by M, and a little bit more play in the dominance of like just in holding the boundary. So it's like for P, like him coming in, for example, I'll just give you guys a one run through. It's not necessarily the way you would do it, but I'm just going to offer an example of how this could go. It's okay. So M goes, all right, like, what do you mean? Are you not going to eat your protein? And it's like, well, you guys have had this conversation several times, right? And so he can, there's a way in which you can hold that sovereignty and hold that boundary, but respond in a very playful manner, right? Where you're like, oh, are you momming me again? Like where it's just like it's more like there's a little bit more play, and there isn't like a criticism back, because what's happening is one criticism is creating another criticism, and then the closures happen, you know and it's the more there's closure, the harder it is to open. But if in the moment you instantly address, and it's a breaking of a pattern, right? But if you get cheeky about it, and I don't know like what works for you guys, but I'll give you an example in my life. Like my man used to, when I would get a little bit feisty, he'd be like, oh, is that what's happening right now? Okay, come on over, you're gonna sit on my lap, and you're gonna get a few spanks. And that's just like how we made it, like we just made it playful. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, and I would realize in the moment that he was calling me out on this pattern that I had, that wasn't intentional, because none of us are intending to do this. Obviously, you both love each other, and it's just this moment of like such a knee jerk response, right? It's like, yeah, don't fucking mother me, right? Like, that is a legitimate like boundary to have. Like, he is a sovereign man, and he gets to choose what he puts in his body. And also, he gets to come to you with also an open heart. Maybe it's in the moment, maybe it's later, and go, I really appreciate that you are concerned about my health. Like that, like to actually feel that, like, oh, actually it's just because she's concerned, and I'm a fucking grown man. Let it go. Right? But there's a way that I'm just curious, like for you, I'm like, does it feel, is there a little bit of turn on when there is like a holding of a boundary in a beautiful way?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because sometimes a no can feel really good, because it's actually more trustable in our men. Because if he was like, okay, I'll eat my dinner
Oh, no.
or
Yeah.
whatever, like
No,
that,
gross.
no one wants to have sex with that,
Right. I
right?
think
It's not a turn on.
the playful thing that you brought in,
Mm.
like, deeply releases something in me that it's not.
Mm.
Yeah, like, there's almost like a parental thing happening for me if the tone of voice is, such and such way, that then I feel like I'm being told, "No, no, no," but not in a nice way, not in a playful way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's happening for, but also cut and paste that experience. That's exactly, and chime in if I'm
Yeah.
incorrect, but that's exactly what's happening for P as well.
Yes.
Because I mean, he's literally saying, "Don't mom me," right?
Yeah.
So e- each of you, for a moment, goes back into that. I'm 3, 4, 5 years old, and a caregiver, a parent, is doing the thing that used to just close me. And so if you both are playing that out, which again, that's literally why relationships are the most healing of incubators. It's
Mm.
because it's the place where the other person is the placeholder for a parent or a caregiver, right? Depending. And so the more conscious we become of the fact of like, oh, I'm actually responding this way because I have an aversion to being mommied, or I have an aversion to being shamed or not understood. Um, when we start to realize that, we can actually detach a little bit more from the experience, and we're not so drowning in the experience of closure. We're actually pulling back and being like, oh right, this is like the thing that happens. And also, we are not 3 or 4 years old. We are two grown ass adults who are playful, sexual, and love each other. So how do we bring in like the play and the like sex and the like, just, and make it like, oh, ha ha ha, like keep you in the adult version of you? Because that's part of what happens too. Like when you, again, it's not everyone's flavor, but if when you're like, oh, come on over, get on my lap, let me give you a couple of spanks, like it's a way to bring in like the sexual play, which keeps you as an adult. Like you're not going, I mean, unless there's a very particular scenario as a child, like that wouldn't bring up anything else, right? It just keeps you as an adult. And
Mm.
so other examples, because I don't want to harp too much on the like sexual spanking specifically, but like I'm trying to think of like, there's so many ways. Let's take a less playful way and a more open-hearted way. So let's say the response from P is, "Don't mommy me," and it's sharp because he's tired. It's the end of the day, whatever, right? Like we're not always resourced, and like one of us has to go first. Always, we have to be like, I'm going to be the generous one today, and hopefully, one person is a little bit more resourced and can like be like, all right, I'm gonna take this one for the team. And so let's say he's sharp. You have the instant response of, oh my god, I'm just trying to help, da, 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 right? And instead, you check in and go, oh, like what's really underneath that is that I'm just really concerned. And so, what if after that you came to him? And I know it's going to be against, again, it's fighting a habit, but you actually get really close to him and you look up at him and into his eyes and you're like, just worried about you. I know I'm doing the thing, but I'm just worried. And it's just so innocent because no one is going to feel defensive. Well, let me check in. Pete, how would you respond to like her just like a soft purring kitten coming over and being like, I just want to make
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, definitely. I would be more receptive to that because it would feel like a genuine form of care, I guess, instead of
Mm.
more of a demand.
Yeah, like the way that you were nuzzling his shoulder earlier, like in the moment, like, oh yeah, I know I did the thing, right? It's like there's that is an opening that also I saw how it opened him, right? So it's like in those moments, and by the way, this is the hardest work. Like it's not easy, even though conceptually it is. In the moment, all we want to do is do the thing that we've done a million times before, which is like, fuck you, but in our own way. And but it's okay, how this is like the martial arts of relating. It's like, okay, how do I take a few breaths, go, okay, I'm doing the thing that I do, but I don't actually want to do it, right? Because you don't actually want to be in closure and you don't want to be snapping, right? Like no one wants to be in these situations, but it's the way that we respond when we feel that our survival is being threatened, our sovereignty is being threatened, our freedom is being threatened, love is being threatened, like depending on what it is, right? But there's a threat. And so we go, either like this or we go outward, like and yeah, right. For those listening, what I was just doing with my body was just like either like a hiding, closing, shutting down, or like a fighting and reaching out and sort of poking and aggressing, and that's just a primal animal response that we all have, and it's good because ultimately it keeps us alive. But in these situations, we're not actually fighting for our life, even though on some subconscious level it may feel that way, because we feel like the other person is taking away something that we really want. And so in
Mm.
P's case, that's sovereignty and freedom, right? And his ability to choose. And for you, it's being seen, which is really love, which also happens to parallel with masculine and feminine priorities. So the masculine in all of us craves freedom above anything else. The feminine in all of us craves love, connection, which of course comes in the form of being understood, being heard, being seen, being praised, all those things. So let me check in and see how this is landing for you.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, it feels good. I think there's some good advice in there. I think the one thing that I do have to say is I recognize that that playfulness has to be in there, and I thought that I had given you that in that moment because I had
Mm,
tried to get you and smile at you when I said that, but I
mm,
feel like that needs to be a little louder, I guess.
mm.
I'm curious, yeah, for what would need to happen for it to feel less like a criticism? Because it sounds like, yeah, he felt like he was doing a little bit more of a playful energy, but maybe you need it to be more extreme than that. And so, what would have it land in your body as like funny or, yeah, just lighter and not critical?
I think that just like to really exaggerate it, if that's something that you feel like you have the ability to do in the moment, because I know these things about myself, and I know that if something's coming up like that, that I will perceive a situation to be something that it might not be. And I'm not going to like gaslight myself here, but I know that if I'm, how do I even say that? Being triggered by something, that I might see him as being like more of an aggressor than he is actually being in that moment. That's all I need to say. It's simple enough. Um, so I need the playfulness to be like, to just be bigger.
Yeah, I recognize that.
Yeah. Is that enough? Should I go
Yeah.
into more
Yeah, that's one way to do it, right? So what we have to do often when we're breaking a pattern is go really extreme. And this is something that I learned that was so valuable for me in my own journey of relating over the years in the like lineage of polarity work, like the David Data, John Wineland, etc. lineage. It's like um, I had to do all of these ridiculous things that my mind thought were so dumb, right? Like just over exaggerate, like get extra theatrical about things. But it's a great way to break the pattern in your nervous system that goes into the same fight or flight response. And so
Mm,
it's not that you have to stay in that level of exaggeration forever. It usually just takes three incidences. Like, I feel like 3 to 4 times, and you start to really carve a new neural pathway and a new way of responding to something. But in those first 3 times, like, yes, it has to be ridiculous. Like, I always remember I had one love coach many years ago, Annie Lala, who I adore, and I was having a thing with my partner at the time where I had a really hard time asking for what I wanted. And so we went through an exercise where every time I would ask for what I wanted, which were like, silly things like, can I get a glass of water? Or, just really small things. But he would have to like cheerly, like jump up and down and do this full dance and be like, yay, you asked for what you wanted. No, Like, I'm not going to give it to you. But like, you would sell it. Like, I'm so like, I celebrate you for asking for what you want. And sometimes, he gave me the thing, but sometimes he was a no because he got to say no. That's him as a sovereign being. And I remember the first few times doing it being like, oh my God, this is so like exaggerated. It's killing me because I'm more of a subtle kind of gal. And it took only like 3 tries of him being ridiculous with like pom poms and I don't know what and jumping around the kitchen and doing the thing for me to be like it breaks something and I no longer felt as scared to ask for what I wanted. And so it's the same thing, but in a different scenario here, where it's like, can you be so exaggerated and playful or so truly just open in your heart where you take a couple of beats and go, oh, this is actually what I want here. Can I bring that to him or can he bring it to me? Because it also can go the other way. Like, when you get asked that question about what you're eating, P, you can also just say, like, I really, really see how much you care about me. And I'm a no, right? But like, really just bringing your heart in that. And the key words of like, I see you, I see your care, because that's all that she's trying to do. She's trying to care for you. But for you, it's like hovering and complaining and like too much mommy shit. And also like, what the fuck, I'm a man, leave me alone. Right? All legitimate. And it's
That's
like,
I feel like that's like that when you said that, I feel like that's the thing that would actually shut down the desire to respond to it, for me.
in a good way or in a bad way? Like when you say shut
In no,
down.
in a good way. In a good way. Like, because there are a bunch of different responses that he could have that I can feel in myself, like, still wanna have the, like I still wanna push the conversation.
Mm.
I still wanna talk about it. I still wanna,
So if he
um,
were to
fucking
acknowledge your care,
yeah,
you would feel like, okay, I'm going to back off now.
yeah.
Okay. So you
I hear
see
that.
what's beautiful. So there's so many different places in that conversation where one person can go, oh, now's where I'm going to break the pattern. So it could be even before don't mom me. It could be like, oh, I see. Like if he's got the resource and the awareness in that moment when this situation or some version of it happens again, if he's able to at the very, front end of things be like, oh, she's doing the thing where she cares. But also it's like hovering. So I'm just going to acknowledge that she cares and then maybe she'll stop hovering. And that may be something that you're able to do. If not, you might respond with the like fuck off energy, right? Or the like don't mom me or whatever. Then that's a chance for you, Em, to come in and go, I'm going to be the resource generous one who's going to break the pattern. And I'm going to go like, here's what's coming up for me. Here's, it's just because of this. Or, um, you could even like cheekily respond to him, like after he's like, oh, don't mom me, you're like, oh, yeah, I did the thing, and like, what are you gonna do? I need to get punished, like, or whatever. Like, there's a lot of different. So it's just an invitation to notice all the different entry points into changing the pattern.
Yeah, completely.
And sometimes there's one person goes, sometimes the other person goes. Like it's just, you know, how resourced are we? And hopefully no one's keeping tabs and we just assume that it sort of balances itself out. But the idea is like, oh, okay, the other person is in their closure. Can I open them? How can I
Mm.
open them? Can I open them by me being open? Can I open them by making a joke, by being playful, by being silly? Are there like other very artful ways to open them? It really depends on your specific personalities and what works for you. And it's very different for each couple. But the principle is the same, which is like noticing the moment where you go from we're on the same team, because that's really what you're trying to do is you just want to be together doing your thing, but there's this moment where it's like, oh, now we're, instead of facing the world that together, we're facing each other and there's a standoff. And so if you notice that moment, it's like, can you go back to the vault of love and go like, no, 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 I know that we're actually a team and I'm going to step up and try to shift this today, right now. And it's never going to feel like, oh yeah, it's easy to, it's going to be my turn today. No, it's always hard. Like you're never going to want to do it. Like it's so, the resistance is real. And it's like going to the gym, right? You never really want to go, but then you're there and you're like, this actually feels great, you know? So it's like sometimes you just have to give yourself that little extra push of like, okay, I'm doing the nervous system gym now. I'm doing it for the sake of our love. I know underneath it all that there's like, this is why we're, you know, we're a team. And so let's see what happens if I shift this. And also for myself, like it's just gonna feel better. Like everyone's gonna feel better if there isn't a whole 24 hours of shutdown and closure. Mm,
Completely.
Mhm.
beautiful. Is there any other like I just want to make sure as we're closing that there isn't like any thread or like yeah but or anything else that's like swirling in your mind around this.
Not for me. I feel like that's good advice, and to have it kind of picked apart and analyzed that way, and then have you present it the way that you do. It's almost like there's already recognition of those things. It's just the work needs to be done. I really like your analogy with the gym. That's a good one. It
Yeah,
makes a lot
just
of sense to
yeah, pulling out that little bit of willpower that's left. Like, oh, I can do it. I want to kill the other person, but I'm gonna be different, right? And what's beautiful is once you get into the momentum of that, when one person starts to be more generous, so to speak, and goes first, there's more inspiration by the other person to do that on a different occasion. And then that really cultivates a whole nother level of trust and love. And the walls do start to come down because you're like, oh, this person is not my enemy. This person is actually doing something right now. Like, let's say I don't know, like, trying to think of something. Like, let's say I'm walked out of the room and like put on some sort of Halloween costume that she just happens to have that is literally like a wall or something. And she like walks out and is just like making commentary on the fact that she's in total closure and just doesn't know what to do about it. Like, my guess is that you would laugh because it's so ridiculous, right? Like it would break the tension of the moment. And so there's ways that the moment that that would happen, I'm sure P, you would be like, oh, right. Like, I love this woman. Like, this is, what are we doing here? And so it's like finding your own unique, creative, in the moment ways of just breaking that tension of like, we're fighting each other to like, oh, look, I'm just here doing the most ridiculous thing ever for the sake of love. And it melts everything away. And I think keeping also in the back of your mind, like, because some key pieces and needs came up today, the need to be seen and heard and understood, which is all sort of the same thing. And then the need for sovereignty. And we, all of us humans, have both of those needs. It's just in this situation, that's what comes up for the two of you. And it may be because of particular situations when you were growing up. Like it just might have, it might be a thing that just like is the thing that rubs you the wrong way and feels like the most threatening for your existence. And so even just the awareness of that, of like, oh, okay, the other person is now threatening something in me and I'm having this like response. And also, oh, the other person has this particular wound around not being seen or around not being given freedom. How can I love them in a way that they feel safe to be seen, or they feel seen, or they feel free, right? Because that's the gift that you get to offer your partner. So you get to offer P freedom and sovereignty, and he gets to offer you a chance to be recognized and seen in your care, even if he's a no to the way that it maybe presented, right? But if you both give yourself, are aware of that and give more of that in just your language and the way that you interact with each other, it just helps create more love and space in the field. And the fence comes down and the corn grows and all the things happen.
Definitely. That's
Yeah,
definitely some good insight.
Yeah,
yeah.
that feels good. Yeah,
Great. Wonderful work.
thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
I love you guys so much. Thank you for listening. We would love for you to rate and review the show, and I'd love to know your takeaways from the episode. You can do that by DMing me on Instagram at Nadia Munla.